first slide might look a little bit ominous. Because the story we're gonna look at today, of course, really sort of emphasizes this dark person that comes out of the tombs, and we'll get to that in just a minute. We're gonna really. But first we have to ask a question.
Yeah.
Who remembers the comedian that had this skit or this line? You can just. Wilson. Flip Wilson, yes.
Who?
There he is. The devil made me do it. We'll see if that applies or not as we continue today. I'm going to ask this question to begin, and you don't have to reveal too much here to your fellow church people. So I'm going to ask you to respond to this question in a unique way. So, do demons or evil spirits exist in the world today? If you believe they do, just respond by putting your hand over, don't do it yet, with your hand open over your chest. If you don't believe it, put a fist over your chest, okay? Go ahead. Okay, thank you. Pretty large majority said yes. Just so you know, that's what's in the air in the room as we begin to talk about this. And it's understandable that people would say yes. It's also probably understandable that some would say no. So our goals today, we're going to do the three things. We're going to explore the story of Jesus and the Gerasene Demoniac. You heard a good sermon about it today. If you were at the first service, you'll hear another one. If you're at the second service, probably the same one. Think about what the story means from a theological perspective, and we're going to consider what this dramatic story means for our faith and life today. Those are the three things we're going to focus on. Here's just to get us going, the healing of the Gerasene Demoniac from the 11th century codex. It's a kind of a vellum codex of the Gospels, and it's illustrated. And this illustration is in there. This was commissioned by an abbess in Germany in 1020. What do you notice about the fresco? Can you see what's happening here?
The demons coming out of the mouth.
There's a demon flying out of the person's mouth, so very specific. Can you see what the demon, what would you say about the demon?
It has wings.
It has wings. Yeah, interesting. In ancient art, a lot of times demons looked like angels. They were kind of just the opposite. They were yeah, so looks like you've got but he's got dark hair. I guess that's the difference. It's not blonde. So we're going to look at Mark, that you have the text in front of you. We're not going to actually take time to read the text. I'm going to just rely on you to sort of skim, and we're going to go very fast through this because we want to get to some other discussion. But we're going to look at where this takes place and what's happening in the setting and what's important about that. Then we're going to look at the characters themselves, who's in the story, and then we're going to look at kind of the flow or the plot. And we're going to do this fast, so maybe like 5 minutes on each section. But I'm going to ask you to just to help. And some of you know this story, some of you have heard the story, but you have the story in front of you. So we're going to go pretty quickly. So where does the action take place? And what other things do you notice about the setting? Move forward. There we go. I'm going to go here first. So the first thing you see is what?
They get into the boat and go away.
They get into the boat and go away.
Well, they go over to,
They just got out of a boat.
yeah, they're
Yep.
in Gerasene, they left.
And we'll talk about that in the next section about where they were before they came here, but they're in the region of the Gerasenes.
They land in a cemetery.
They land near a cemetery, must be, yeah. What else do you notice about what's there?
Immediately,
What's that?
immediately.
Immediately, how does that relate to place? We're just talking place now, geography.
I don't see the sea.
There's, oh, good, interesting. We'll come back to that. He said, I don't see the sea. Then we have another map. Okay. What else is happening with the place?
Mountainous.
Mountainous, must be mountainous because there's a steep cliff. And where did the pigs go?
Into the water.
Over the cliff into water, so into the lake supposedly. What else? What else is happening with the geography here? There's some people. There's a city nearby, and the city in this story is Gerasa. Okay,
It's on the east bank of the Jordan.
it's on the east bank of the Jordan. I guess there's a way to do this, right? Yeah, there's the Jordan River, so it's east bank. So that's pretty good. Let's start with the Gerasenes, the country of the Gerasenes or Gerasa, which is modern Jerash in Jordan. It was part of the Decapolis, which was a league of 10 ancient Greek cities formed in Palestine after the Roman conquest of 63. So most of the people who live in this area are not Jewish. They're Greek or other Palestinian, however we want to define that. And here's the Decapolis. So you've got the 10 cities of the Decapolis are in red. So this takes place close to Gerasa in this story in Mark. But where's the sea? Rick, where's the sea?
Up north.
It's way up here. So in the story, Jesus gets out of the boat. He's been on the Sea of Galilee. And I believe that's where it is that they're talking about. And he comes to the region of the Gerasenes over here. That must be a long cliff.
Yeah.
Miles.
Yeah, it's pretty far. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Steve's got a slide to talk about that. So we'll talk about the reason why in one other gospel, this is in the story instead, which is a little closer to the sea. So just to summarize really quickly then. If it will cooperate with me. There we go. It's near water. Okay. Come on. Cooperate. Operate. There we go. In or near some tombs. What do we know about tombs? Unclean. It's an unclean area. So if you were a Jewish person listening to this story, you'd think, not only is this person demon possessed, but he's living in the most unclean of places, impure places. Of course, Jesus, that doesn't bother Jesus, does it? In the hills and mountains, where there's grazing land, there's a sea nearby, or a lake, or maybe it's a river. I don't know. It's hard to reconcile the geography a little bit. There's city and country. And so now we turn to the characters. Just who are the characters? Jesus, okay.
The guy with
The
the,
demoniac,
Disciples,
the disciples are with Jesus.
the bystanders,
The bystanders are the townspeople, yeah.
swineherders.
The swine herders, right, who witness what's going on.
Swine.
and the legion,
The swine, yeah, the swine are characters.
the legion.
And legion, exactly. We'll just get these up here too. And notice that Jesus has just come from calming the storm. You'll hear that in the Spark Story Bible today. So Jesus has spoken to the storms and calmed them down, and now the boat is on the other side of the water, and they come to a man with an unclean spirit. It's interesting that in this version of Mark, NRSVUE, they call him a man with an unclean spirit, even though in the Bible, the kind of the summary line, the title line says the Gerasene Demoniac. He's never called a demoniac in the story itself. He's the man with the unclean spirit. And then there's Legion. Does the Legion, what do you know about Legion?
Too
It's not a
many to
Roman
count.
military designation.
It's an
A
army.
large number?
It's,
Somebody said-
it's a military background.
Is it Roman?
Yeah.
Somebody said, yeah.
Well,
Yeah. It means a large contingent of Roman soldiers.
Is it a particular number?
I don't know if it's a particular number.
I'm-
Steve is the Legion expert.
I don't know if it's particular number, but it's a cadre or I
Yeah.
think it might be 1,000, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
And they're kind of known as different types of legion. We discovered that legions, Roman legions, often had a banner that had an animal of some kind on it. And we think that a number of them use the wild boar as their symbol. So here, for instance, oh, why do these things not go? There we go. This is a Roman roof tile showing the boar badge of the standard of the 20th Legion. And there we go. Here's the standard of the 13th Legion, Gemenia, and it's a wild boar.
And the Legion in Palestine used that symbol,
Yeah.
or in Jerusalem and that area had that banner or symbol.
Right. So why do you think the Romans would, maybe it was just a coincidence that the Roman soldiers had the boar as their flag, but if it wasn't a coincidence, what would be the significance of having a boar on their flag? So
Ferocious animal.
ferocious animal,
Unclean animal.
an unclean animal to whom?
Jews.
To the Jews, but not to the Romans.
So imagine these flags being flown with the Legion as they march through the streets and march from town to town. It's like having the most unclean animal possible being shoved in your face. Really. So, yes, David.
Is there any significance to the fact that there's singular and plural involved, a singular spirit, and yet there were multiple people in this legion? Is there a significance to that, or is that just intriguing?
Oh, to Legion, why there's so many, yeah, that's a good question. Maybe Steve wants to respond to this too, but my thinking is that it was to show just how devastated he was by this large number of spirits. It wasn't just one spirit, it was a whole bunch.
Mark says 2,000 swine.
Mark says
Would
2,000
that be
swine.
an hyperbole to make a point, exaggeration?
Anything is possible, Gary. You sat in the front row and you said you were going to be good today.
Depends on your definition.
Well, 2,000 would have been a lot. I mean, a herd of 2,000 pigs would have been huge. I think it is hyperbole in some ways that it just shows how if this man was affected by this legion of demons. Do you want to say any more about that?
No, I think that as stories are told, Mark is the one who gets specific and says 2,000. Matthew and Luke, in telling this story, don't have a number.
Right.
And so I think Mark is just trying to emphasize the large number.
Gonna keep moving. So, who are the characters in the story? We've named these, the pigs, the swineherds, the people from the city. So what happens in the story? I'm gonna just do this to make sure we just go kind of quickly, just as a summary. A man with an unclean spirit approaches Jesus and bows down before him. He identifies Jesus and asks that Jesus not torment him. What's interesting about this? The fact that he identifies
He's
Jesus.
a Gentile for one thing.
He's a Gentile.
And it's the demons who seem to recognize Jesus, not the disciples.
Yeah, it's the demons that seem to recognize Jesus. And all throughout the Gospel of Mark, this happens over and over again, where the disciples and the people don't really understand who Jesus is, but every time he comes across a demon, they know who he is. Interesting. So the angels with dark hair recognize the angels. No. So Jesus calls the unclean spirit to come out of the man, and then he asks the spirit's name. The names, and the spirit says, of course, spirit calls itself Legion and begs not to be sent away, but rather to be relocated in the swine. That's kind of interesting. That at least they will have a place that they can continue to live. I don't think they realize that maybe the swine wouldn't be able to take it and they're going to take off and go over the cliff. But anyway, do you want to say more about that, Steve?
The Legion, remember that Scott talked about the Roman symbol. And it's possible that embedded in this story is a pretty strong anti-Roman message. And that there's a strong political element to this message. That Legion was the name of Roman troops. The swine was the banner. And of course, the unclean spirit is Rome.
That's weird.
One interpretation.
One interpretation. Exactly.
Jesus does give permission to the spirits to go, and they enter the swine, which rush down the bank into the sea.
What about verse 10? I think
Yes.
that's interesting.
Verse 10.
Begged him earnestly not to send them out of the region.
Right.
Why?
Yeah. Well, they probably liked where they were in the guy, for one thing, but maybe it's again, this is all speculation. If it's a political conversation going on, they don't want to go to the Jewish region. They don't want to stay in this region, in the theoretically unclean region, but not sure. Tony.
I've often wondered if we're to assume that when the swine drowned, did the demons, the demoniacs still live? I mean, it's like, I think there's supposed to be that thought that, okay, they're all dead and gone now, but I'm not sure that that's really what happened. I've wondered if the demons still live.
Say anything about that. Steve's not gonna take that swine. No, I think I did read in one commentary something about the idea that demons didn't do well in water, and that was one of the reasons why this is part of the story. So, yes.
When Tony mentioned that, it just reminded me Old Testament in the drowning, when the people were fleeing from the soldiers after leaving Egypt.
Yeah,
They drowned in the sea there too, you know.
yeah, the
So then
Romans,
again,
the Egyptian
that
soldiers,
corresponding-
soldiers, yeah. There could be something like that going on. That's interesting. It could be a kind of a
Reminding them
flashback or reminder
of their story.
of the story. And the Egyptians
Yeah.
drown in the sea. Here's our Romans drowning in the sea in the likeness of pigs, of course.
We also have the prodigal son reference to pigs.
Yeah. The prodigal son was feeding the pigs. He was debasing himself. You know, because as a Jewish person, he wouldn't be doing that, but he had no choice. So the swineherds tell the people of the city what happened. People of the city come out to see for themselves and see the demoniac, the man with the unclean spirit, clothed and in his right mind. They are afraid. And so they ask Jesus to leave the neighborhood. The healed man asks to come along with Jesus and his disciples. Jesus tells him no, and tells him to go home and be with his friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for him. This particular thing really strikes me, that the man, where was the man? He was living in the tombs and in the surrounding neighborhood. He was completely separated from his family and his friends and from community, completely separated. And Jesus says, no, you don't need to come with us, the disciples. I've got disciples, you know. You go home and what? You be with your friends. I can't think of a more impressive way or important way of being healed. If you're separated, completely separated, you're your life is completely in shambles, and somebody says, I'm going to heal you so that you can go home and be with your friends. Just think about that for a second, you know,
He
yes.
doesn't use the word friends.
Really? Oh,
His own people.
with his own people. Guess what I did?
He added the word friends.
I added the word friend.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of express the point, because it was his friends, it was his neighbors. Go be with your neighbors. Go be with your friends. Yeah, David.
Could this have been early enough in Mark's gospel that Jesus was still more going toward the Jews and not more globally toward the Gentiles? There are stories that you see a transition of Jesus then moving more out of exclusively for the Jews, you know, the woman at the well and all those other stories. Or
Yeah, but
what about
I don't think the woman at the well is in Mark,
but how about the dogs eat the scraps from the table story?
I'm not sure if that's in Mark either.
But I mean, you see a transition
yeah.
through the gospel, more exclusively Jewish, and then as it goes farther on, more toward everybody.
Yeah, I don't think I would say that. I think that most of his ministry takes place in Galilee, which is on the other side of the Jordan River. This is kind of an unusual situation where he goes into this area of the Decapolis. This is a little bit out of the ordinary.
I think if I was a swineherder, I'd be quite upset.
There you go. Yes. He said, if I were a swineherder, I'd be very upset. That's one of the reasons I think the people tell him to get out of here. If you're gonna kill our pigs, if you're gonna destroy everything, you know, we don't want you around. We always think everybody wants Jesus around. Well, apparently not. So I want to make sure we can keep moving to some of the things that Steve wants to talk about here too. So this is kind of, this is what's happening in the story. You gotta get a pretty good idea of what's happening. So the man does go around the Decapolis telling his story. Okay, I think this is the one. This is pretty interesting because this compares the different gospel versions of this.
One other note that you might see in this story is that Well, the disciples throughout Mark are really confused. They don't get it. As Scott mentioned, the demon possessed or man with the evil spirit testified to him as Lord when he first landed. The other thing that is very consistent in the Gospel of Mark, almost completely consistent, is after healings and after events that have happened, Jesus says, don't tell anybody. And of course, there's been whole theology around the secret, messianic secret that is there, that people wouldn't understand what it means to declare him Lord until he actually was crucified. And at the end of the story, the centurion says, this is the Son of God in Mark. And Jesus doesn't tell him, don't say anything, he's dead. But it's at that point that the fullness of who he has come to be is being revealed in a way that's not, maybe not normal. In this story, the demon-possessed or uncleaned man testifies to him as the Son of God or the Lord. And then at the end of the story, Jesus says, go and tell people what God's done for you. It may be the only time in the Gospel of Mark, if not the only time, one of the very few times that Jesus ever says, go tell people. So that's just one note.
Steve,
Yes,
is that because he's not in his community? He's gone across the sea into to them, a foreign land.
it's possible. It's possible. Deb said, is that because he's not because he's not in the Jewish community? And the fact of the matter is, perhaps among the Gentiles, they wouldn't understand it in exactly the same way. But Jesus was trying to break down the expectations of a Messiah, whereas he was fulfilling it through his passion. But if you think back to the map, Mark and Luke place it at in Gerasenes, the region of the Gerasenes. Matthew says Gadarenes. Gadara is closer to Sea of Galilee. And so we have that distinction. And of course, the picture up here is the picture up here again, the casting out of the demons, and you see the fake angels or the demons that resemble angels. And in Matthew, it's 2 demon-possessed men. And so you have a picture of 2 with the demons being cast out. That angel thing, one of the things that is interesting, and we'll get at, depending on time, we'll get at the fact that the demonic is deceitful. And so if you have angel appearing demons, but that are distorted, that kind of gets at that notion that evil can present itself kind of as good, but it's twisted. And so you have that kind of picture. Yes.
I like this. I don't know if you can see this down here in the corner. Those the demons riding the back of the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopping on it.
Yeah, swine. Thank you. Thank you. One other just real quick note. In Revelation, the number for evil or the devil is what? 666. The perfect number in their numerology was 7.
Oh.
So 666 is just short of 7. It's a distorted perfection. And so you have that, the power of that. In Mark and Luke, it says he got out of a boat. In Matthew, it just says when he was there, they approached him. It's told in the order where he's recently gotten out of a boat, but anyway. In Matthew, 2 demoniacs, Mark, one man with an unclean spirit, and Luke, one man who had demons, is how it's described. In Mark, an interesting picture is that when Jesus came, the man with evil spirits worshiped him, it said. In Luke, it says fell down before him or bowed before him. And so you have that little distinction. Mark and Luke, Jesus asked, "What is your name?" And they responded, "Legion." In all 3, the demons begged to be cast into the swine. Only Mark provides the number 2,000 swine. And in Matthew and Mark, it says into the sea. Luke says into the lake. Take that for what it is. Whatever. The people saw the man clothed and in his right mind and were afraid and asked Jesus to leave. Whereas in Matthew, when they saw Jesus, they begged him to leave. I thought that was maybe an interesting distinction. They saw the man who had been healed, and then they asked Jesus to leave. In Matthew, it simply says, when they came out and they saw Jesus, they begged him to leave. Oops. So we know something of the who, where, the who, the what of the story, but what does it all mean? About little over 20 years ago, I went to Madagascar and was participating in a wedding there. And while I was there, I visited the hospital, the big hospital in their capital city. And adjoining or right near within a block or so of the hospital was kind of a community of those who had some form of mental illness. And what happened, what they did in Madagascar was 1 or 2 people or some people kind of led the community who were healthy. And in this community, these people who had varying issues with mental illness would gather for meals or live within this community. A couple blocks away from that site, there was a church, a Lutheran church. And I went to the Lutheran church after visiting the hospital and the community. And they had, on a very regular basis, exorcisms. Now, they weren't wild and crazy events like we might think from The Exorcist or something like that. But people would come and there'd be a service. And I only got some of the story from the pastor who was translating for me because it was in Malagasy and I didn't understand. But then they had several people who were deacons or deaconesses who wore certain robes to identify themselves, and they were to cast out the demons. Now, one of the things that you need to understand is that for some, it was, oh, my kid's full of the devil. And you gotta, so children were sometimes singled out too, and they didn't bring a person up to the center stage or that sort of thing, but these Christian servants or leaders in the church would walk out among the congregation. And while they were there, or you know, someone would raise their hand or they'd be pointed to a certain person, and they would go up to them, and they had a bit of a ritual or a liturgy that they must have used. But their main thing was they were scolding those demons out. You know, they would come up to a person and get out of that person. You get out now. And that's my understanding of what was happening. And this would be going on in different parts of the church. I also remember way back college years that I knew someone who was part of a service led by a missionary from who was a missionary to Madagascar, who was exorcised and claimed I wasn't part of that, but I think there is this there are different senses of this reality in our world. And I don't think it's just a third world thing. It can translate into our world as well. For trying to prepare for this, I've been reading a book called Glimpses of the Devil, written by a psychiatrist. And he himself had experienced 2 exorcisms. And that, but he cautioned us, and I was asked about how, you know, what is this belief in spirits? I was cautioned, I believe it's real caution to say we ought not be looking under every rock for demon possession. I mean, I can look out in the world and say, there are some people doing some awfully evil things. And it would be really easy to jump to the conclusion that that person is full of the devil. But I think we need to be extremely cautious. But I don't think it's necessary to fully disregard either. And I think that balance, and within this story, of course, what's the bottom line? Jesus was victorious. And Jesus had the authority. And so I think we can look at that. Another thing is demons were, there are virtually no references to demons in the Old Testament. The idea of demons was more an intertestamental reality. And I think in part it was this struggling with how come there's evil in the world? And in recognizing the reality of evil, it has become possible to personify that, to want to personify the evil in some way. And so I think we need to be very, very cautious, but also not totally disregard the power of evil. If you were to rank these words from 1 to 5, from most benign to the most dangerous, how would you rank those? Just different terms for the same thing? Or how do you hear those?
I put evil at the top.
Put evil at the top. I'm with you. As a number 5.
Or did you mean 1, right?
1 was the most benign to 5 being the most dangerous. And I would put evil as number 5 myself. But yes,
I was just, this is a new way of thinking, but if possessed means something that happens to us, and it's not like original sin, an original sin is like, right from the beginning that we are evil and that we are prone to sin. But if you're possessed, maybe it kind of speaks against that a little bit, is that maybe we are children of God. We are good, but then if we get possessed by.
okay. Did everyone hear what Susan said? Okay. This was, yes.
Yeah, I just, this is can be very much scary on one hand. I like your use of the word balance here. I think I read something a while ago, and I can't give credit to the person because I can't remember the person's name, but it was a theologian who wrote about the fact that maybe unclean, he broadened this whole area. Unclean spirits could be those things in our lives or the community's life or the nation's life, which block the love and mercy, that block us from receiving the love and mercy of God in Christ.
Okay, if you could hear that, what Gary was saying was that perhaps unclean spirit, in one author's broadening of it, was to say anything that may be part of our life that blocks us from receptiveness to God's grace and the work of God in us and around us.
Just want to add that read a couple of studies where Christians in the world, about 70% of the Christians in the world really do believe in what was happening in Madagascar. So it's in some ways we're a little bit isolated because I think US Christians maybe not so much. But I was thinking about these words, and I was thinking about the first question when I asked you whether you would believe in evil, the presence of evil spirits or not. Maybe we could just ask a follow-up to that, if you want to say anything about it. But if you did put your hand out like this and saying, God, I believe that there are evil spirits, what prompted you to do that? Does anybody want to speak to that? You don't have to. I'm just curious because I think it fits in with this list that Steve has created.
Well, you look at what's going on in Ukraine and Gaza. You look at the mass shootings in our schools in America. To me, it can't be anything but evil.
Okay. Is that the same as evil spirits overtaking them?
Well, the people doing it
Yeah,
are. They aren't doing it of their own free will.
yeah,
Something is causing them to act that way.
yes.
Me?
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
I was
Yeah.
going to say something very similar. I mean, yeah, I don't know how you can look around the world and not believe there's evil. Now, do I believe there are, demon possessed people? I don't know. But certainly there are forces of evil that are very strong in this world, in my opinion.
One of your recent sermons, you sort of said you didn't think there were. You kind of hinted that, well, we think of things in other ways, like mental illness and things like that, but not necessarily the presence.
I don't think I said there wasn't.
Okay, well.
I'll have to look back and see.
I think also that the reason I think there may be evil spirits out there is I have read stories about somebody who has had that sense of evil within them. And something transformed them, whether it was, and I choose to say the grace of God found its way in, and they are different. And whatever that transformation was, again, I choose to think that somehow the breath of God went in and allowed them to be open to that healing and chase something away, because some cloud lifted.
In this book I'm reading, the person who had the exorcism, when she was before the exorcism, talked about the fact that she felt like a fetus swimming in the amniotic fluid. And she was just surrounded by evil, or by the power, by a power. And I do think it's important to acknowledge that in our own Christian faith, anybody here really able to explain the Trinity? There are mysteries about God. Perhaps there are also mysteries about evil. But again, if we acknowledge the work and grace of God and the power of Christ as having the final authority in our lives, then there's protection there. Yes. Yep.
I have a hard time separating the evil that people do because of what their beliefs are or whatever versus mental health issues. It seems like a lot of what we're talking about is really closer to a mental health issue than it is to a belief system or a spirit or something. Spirit maybe is a mental health thing too, but I just can't separate those two. It seems like we could attribute much more of the actions of people to mental health than we can to well, he's got a demonic spirit in him. It just seems like an excuse.
Yeah, the comment being that we may use demons or whatever as an excuse,
right,
to gloss over mental health issues. And I believe that is extremely important. And in this book I'm reading by the psychiatrist, he would say the same thing. And what he would say is that in the two cases he has worked with, he said they both could present themselves as mental health issues, except they were tweaked or deviated from any standard clinical diagnosis. And so there were certain appearances of mental health issues, but they were tweaked. And again, might that be part of the deception of evil? But I do agree with you. We shouldn't discount the work of mental health, the mental health work. And that's the first step. So, yes, follow.
Yeah, just follow up, but last night, we watched a movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. I don't know how many of you've seen that, but the lead in that movie, the lead demon in that movie, it turns out to be an evil person. And yet, throughout the movie, he acts it very normal, very, what should I say, believable. Wasn't violent or whatever, but the evil that he did was certainly there. And so, you know, evil can be almost hidden.
Yeah.
Until it's exposed.
And that's how insidious it can be. Yeah. Gary, you had something.
Well, I was just kind of following up. I agree with what Dennis is saying, and I think that part of the problem for me is that it's too easy to blame evil for what's going wrong in the world or in my life, and ignore my own responsibility to address it, to try at least as best as I can to do something about it. Whether it be a vote in the right way or you know, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be flippant here.
Right.
I think we have a human responsibility
Absolutely.
given by God to try to love people and love God and make us as healthy as we are able to be.
And back to the Flip Wilson joke.
Yeah.
The joke of that was, you know, absolving myself of responsibility. And we should do anything but that. So, yes, Tony.
Well, one of the times I have heard people talk about and use the word demons is when they struggle with addictive behavior, that there are demons that must be dealt with, and one way to do that is to drown oneself in getting away from it. But that's not the same as mental illness. Addiction issues are not the same as mental illness. And I know that anytime people have had to deal with their own addictions, you have to take away the substance and then start dealing with whatever.
On the other hand, we talk about alcoholism, for example, as a disease or an illness.
Demon rum.
And so there's that aspect. But anyway, we had lots more to talk about potentially. Our time is about up. But I just quickly refer to, what does the story tell us about God? I think it's God has a care for this world, and even for those who seem to be possessed by evil. And God has authority in this world. What does it tell us about evil and demons? There's power to evil as well. And I think
weakness.
and weakness. And I think in terms of characteristics of evil, think of deceit. Deceit is at the core. Finally, when we pray, save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil, what are we asking for? What are we asking for? And Scott, do you want to read the Luther's explanation?
We'll use this as kind of closing. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about here. We just kind of scratched the surface, and you're probably, especially Debbie's wondering what I was talking about in her sermon, so I want to apologize for that. I heard something, and it probably wasn't exactly what I said. We'll have to talk through that. Save us from the time of trial. What does this mean? It is true that God tempts no one, but we ask in this prayer that God would preserve and keep us so that the devil, the world, and our flesh may not deceive us or mislead us into false belief, despair, and other great and shameful sins. And that although we be attacked by them, we may finally prevail and gain the victory. It's Luther's explanation to save us from the time of trial and then deliver us from evil. What does this mean? We ask in this prayer, as in a summary, that our Father in heaven may deliver us from all kinds of evil, affecting body or soul, property or reputation, and at last, when our final hour comes, may grant us a blessed end and take us by grace from this valley of tears to himself in heaven. That's Luther's.
Why weren't more of you reciting that along with Scott?
Yeah,
That's what I want to know.
Didn't want to interfere.
Worried about the translation.
Yeah, might be, it's the ELW translation, maybe they didn't know.
So thank you all, and I know you have all the answers now, so.
No, we're waiting for me to.